to this very special edition of the Startup Central. I'm Nayantara Rai, today coming to you from an OYO townhouse in Gurugram. My guest today, he's in the hot seat, is the Chief Executive Officer of our OYO India and South Asia. Rohit, welcome to the show. Also, thank you for giving your first television interview on all the controversies that are surrounding this unicorn. How's the last couple of days been?
Thank you for having me on the show. I think last couple of days have been interesting, as they put it. Lots of action on multiple fronts, but dealing with it and the team is well set. So I look forward to this conversation.
So, I am going to begin with the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
You've been in the news primarily for the massive layoffs. Every company, I understand, goes through rescaling, getting rid of the fat, as they call it. But the numbers are just so large.
So let me give you some background, if I may. Look, I think OYO is a 6-year-old company, right? Which has really gone, built a big business in India, multiple verticals, gone international. In fact, this is one of the first companies coming out of India which is in so many countries doing real B2C business, right? And that's something which has been incredible. And when I joined, it was already happening about 13 months back. And I've seen the last 1 year, 2019, where we were built in India and in multiple markets. However, look, Ritesh has said this in the letter he sent to the employees, which got reported in the press, and I'm saying the same thing here, which says there was a point towards the end of 2019 where we felt that maybe we need to calibrate a few things. Maybe we need to calibrate the growth aspiration we have for 2020, the kind of businesses that we want to run in terms of profitability and multiple other things. And one of the very painful and personally I think I regret this, but it was inevitable, is that we had to restructure the business, right? And just to give you some facts, while it looks like large numbers, and they are large numbers, they are not small, our employee base over the last 2 years had gone up by almost 10,000 people. And
that's in India?
Just India. I'm talking just India, South Asia. We went up from approximately 2,000 people to about 12,000.
In how much time?
Employees. About 18 months to 20 months. And we felt because of multiple things happening in the business and what we see the future in 2020, a one-time restructuring was important. And that is under execution. It will get over very soon. It is unfortunate, but we had to.
But Rohit, how when you talk about this one-time restructuring, and I'm going to ask this also because I'm guessing a lot of people who are employed with OYO, affiliated to OYO, and all of that are worried. They're scared. They don't know will they have a job tomorrow. How big is the problem? What is the size of the restructuring? Sometimes we hear it's 1,000 people, then it's 2,400 people, then it's 3,000 plus people, then it's 12% of the workforce. So clarify it for us.
So it is 15 to 20% of the workforce.
Okay.
Right, of the 12,000, and it is in corporate functions across regions, across hubs. But more importantly, look, there are 3 or 4 things I want to say here. One is this has been very tough on us because each one of the employees we had to ask to move on to a different career were colleagues till yesterday, right? And we had shared stories with them, meals, we worked hard with them. It's just it's quite tough. So. And second, in their shoes, it impacts them in a big way, and I totally acknowledge that. Having said that, I think the process which was run, and that's something which is very important, we were able to not only benchmark it to what happens in India, but the very best internationally. And there are 4 or 5 principles we followed. If you want, I can go into the details of that. But to me, that is equally important on how the entire process was handled, and not just the numbers which resulted from it.
15 to 20% of the workforce you're getting rid of in India, 12,000 people strong workforce. I am going to ask a question which an employee always asks when there's a restructuring. I've been employed when there has been one-time restructuring in companies, and my first one is always, yeah man, the top management is not taking a pay cut, right? Are you guys taking a pay cut?
Look, I think the top management goes through a huge amount of pain during the whole process, because if you see all our
you take an emotional pain toll. I get
not
that.
Emotional. I think just not. Look, at the end of the day, I think dealing with this situation is part of the job one can define. So the emotional stress is for everyone. It is not just for top management. I think every employee who's been impacted probably goes through more emotional stress than I am going through right now, and I acknowledge that. I think the top management compensation, etc. We are having a discussion on what is the right structure. Look, anyway, in startup world, your compensation, etc. is linked to the economic outcomes that you achieve, and the economic outcomes are not a question of just financials you achieve. It's about building a sustainable business.
Correct.
So the impact is on everyone.
So is the OYO business sustainable? Are you having to go through this pain exercise simply because it was not sustainable anymore?
So is the OYO business sustainable? Answer is absolutely yes. Does it need to be restructured and rethought in a certain way? That answer too is yes. Right.
So how much will you save with this layoff?
I think those are numbers that we have reported. I've shared the numbers in terms of percentages with you. I don't think it will be fair of me to go into dollar amounts of how much saved, because I think that's not the important part, right? Honestly, the important part for me is the restructuring happening in the right direction? Is the business being built towards objectives we have for 2020? And much more importantly, with the people who have been impacted, are we able to run a process, and not just a process by the sake of a process, but in terms of the empathy, the dignity, the humanness that is needed to go through this period?
Yeah.
Have we done that well with hands on our heart? I think I speak on behalf of my colleagues who are involved in the exercise, and there have been several who have been involved. For them personally, it's been very painful, but all of them have spent like days and nights working on making sure that every conversation, every employee is handled well, right? And that's something.
And it's never been done
it's not
before.
a favor to them.
It's never been done before in the Indian startup universe. This kind of a one-time restructuring. And is it only going to be in India, or is it going to be in other countries too? It has already started.
Look, I have such a significant job to do here in South Asia. I worry more about what's happening in South Asia and want to talk more about that. But globally, I think, look, all startups go through some form of restructuring at some point in time.
Yeah.
So to say that answer
is that you're leading it in India?
Say that answer is never is not fair. But at this point in time, I think I'll rather talk about what's happening in South Asia and India.
I take your point.
Which is itself a very significant topic to talk about.
Was this a decision that the board arrived at independently? Was it something that you and Aditya Ghosh and of course the founder Ritesh Agarwal were discussing, or was it something that SoftBank instructed you to do? Because there's a lot that's being said about it, that SoftBank is behind this. SoftBank, after the global reset of WeWork, has made it imperative that all its companies, portfolio companies, the large ones at least, must achieve profitability.
Right. So I'm very glad you asked this question, because this is something which needs to be addressed. One, we are a board governed company, right? So we have a very solid board. We have made recent additions to the board. Betsy has joined in. Aditya has moved to the board. These are all people with incredible reputations who have gone to the board. Second, like any other stakeholder or shareholder, the shareholders always have an expectation of returns from you, right? And that's normal for any company and not just OYO. Now, to say that there are deadlines or targets which are given, and the companies, if the implication or sort of the direction this is leading to is SoftBank or other investors managing OYO, the answer is unequivocally no. OYO is managed by Ritesh and the who's the founder, and the management team. And we have a very strong management team.
What changed that suddenly this independently governed board decided enough is enough, we need to focus on profitability? You weren't doing it all this time. You were ready to burn cash, raise more cash. So what changed?
So look, I think first of all, again, the premise is that the board decided. The board didn't decide. The decision is done by the management in consultation and information. Like any other good governance practice, is shared with the board, and the consultative process happens. Right? So it will be unfair on me to walk away and say this is done by the board and the shareholders, right? That's not true, and that's neither correct by the part of management team and me as a leader right now to say that. This is a decision that we have taken, right, with different considerations in mind, including the fact that sometimes, let me share something. I did about 5-6 jobs in my initial part of my career, and there were at times when I felt that I was actually better off in another place. And the lens that we are taking, and it is also, can we give meaningful careers to X number of people or X minus number of people, right? And is it better to go through work this part now, make the company sustainable, help the people in multiple ways to get onto a new career in life?
I got it, yeah.
It's probably better sometimes than not doing it, not taking a tough call.
Sometimes things have a habit of working out. But Rohit, when you talk about this one-time restructuring,
right,
you even conceded that the top management is going to be discussing its own compensation. There was a board decision with management to become profitable. Will 2020 therefore be the year that OYO will check into the green?
So look, I think whether 2020 is the year, 2021 is the year is immaterial. I think rather than just talk about profitability, if you allow me, I want to share some of the priorities for 2020.
Sure.
And where the focus is.
Yeah.
So to me, as a South Asia CEO, and I speak on behalf of the management team and leadership here, there are 4 or 5 clear priorities for the year. One is to really build on the partner ecosystem and make sure that we have some benchmark relationship with our partners. To me, the business exists because of partners, and that is very, very important. There has been some noise around that in the past, and while I can go on and say that whether the noise is fair or not fair, the fact is that we need to better our relations with the partners. So that's really priority number 1. The organization is going to focus on that. Priority number 2 for me is we are a fairly large consumer player today. So just to give you a sense, we have almost close to 80 million people who download our app, right? While we were talking, about 40 OYOs got booked in India, right? So the scale that we manage consumer operations is fairly large. It runs very well for 98% of the times, but it doesn't run well enough for 2% of times.
And that's the 2% which comes in the news.
And 2% is too much, right? And I'm not saying that 2% is a small number, so we shouldn't worry about it. I'm saying exactly the opposite. We need to be an organization which is focused on that 2% as well, to make sure that 2% is minimized to the extent possible. And everyone who's trusting their time, money and faith with us, we take good care of that. So that's priority number 2. Priority number 3 is we have some incredible talent, by the way, right? The quality of talent inside OYO absolutely surprised me when I joined OYO, and it continues to surprise me even today. So we have very, very talented colleagues. It's a young workforce. It's our job to make sure that we build a culture which is fantastic, and where there's mission orientation, but people say our lives become much better because we worked here. And I do hope that even people who are impacted by the current decision, at least large part of them, when the dust settles down, will say they learned a lot when they were here, right? That will be success for us to some degree. And 4th is really build a path to profitability in a sustainable fashion. What does it mean? That means that every business or sub part of the business that we are doing, it has a clear line of sight to profitability. We are fundamentally focusing on gross margin of the business, contribution margin of the business, and the costs are structured in a way that it leads to a profitable outcome, and investments will continue for some time. It doesn't, by the way, there's no deadline. I keep hearing about there's a March deadline, there's a April deadline,
so in this road to profitability that you're talking about, for doing that, you will have to cut yourself some slack and your employees some slack, right?
Of course.
So therefore, are you maybe looking at rationalizing your end targets, or whatever targets have been set out for the next 2-3 years?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked me. I hope Ritesh is listening. Now, and jokes apart, I think look, we are a high growth company, right? And it's a question of setting targets which are
Reasonable.
Reasonable is a word, but I mean where metrics can be balanced out well. Where, for example, my partners are ecosystem stable, my customers I'm able to service well, employees feel the stretch, but they also know that they have a decent work-life balance to live with.
No, the point I'm getting at is, like Ritesh Agarwal in his letter has conceded that you grew way too fast.
Which
right?
I said as well.
Yeah, you also said it, and that is a power of retrospectivity. You have the luxury to look back retrospectively. In the moment, you can't. So now, when you are looking back retrospectively and realize, hey, we grew too fast, companies and organizations also have their 5-year plans, 3-year plans, 2-year plans. So are those plans being realigned?
Absolutely. So I think if they were not realigned, we'll not see the changes that we are making right now. They've been realigned, they've been calibrated, but see, the aspiration still remains very large. I don't want to I want that to be clear as well, that we really want to be a significant global company, right? and there's no walking away from that. Now, whether that path takes us a little longer, that's fine. Right? If it is more sustainable, if it is keeps all stakeholders in balance, I think that's a better path, and that's something all of us agreed on.
Okay, that's good to know. So tell me something, when all these news stories came out and you were doing the one-time restructuring, did you get worried calls from your investors, or did you inform them beforehand anyway?
So look, as like any good practice, all stakeholders were kept informed, right? Sometimes in advance. Also we kept them informed of the process, what's unfolding. Not just that, to me the biggest stakeholders during this period were actually frankly not the board or the investors. To me the biggest stakeholders were people who are getting impacted, and all our focus and energy on making sure that we are dealing with that situation as good or well as possible. Have we succeeded fully? It's never the case in these situations. But 98% of our employees, if they feel that this was a fair process and they were dealt with in a human way, with
they may even come back to work with OYO 5-7 years down the line.
Absolutely. Look, nothing will give me more joy than people whom we consider as part and parcel of our fabric.
Yeah.
Someday coming back and working for us. Some may not choose to, but if some of them do, it will be a source of immense joy for me.
Rohit, when you've also been growing and expanding so fast, you guys have also entered new businesses, whether it is co-living, co-working, for example. It is also the wedding banquet business, all of that. Is that business as usual? Because the street has been wondering if you're going to now perhaps consolidate and get rid of the non-core businesses.
Yeah. So the good part about the street is that they see one data, they see another data, string it together and say, here's the hypothesis, right? Very often it is not true. So the way I want to think about it, and let me talk about some of these businesses because it's important. Weddings, we continue to be very, very optimistic about the business. We have a good leader in Sandeep who started the business and he's been with us for more than a year, almost 18 months now. That business has scaled up 10x from the point of time when we acquired it. And honestly, we look forward to that business growing multiple times, not just in scale, but in the quality that they bring to the table, in the choices they offer to consumers. And I think weddings is one area where we Indians know that this is a growth area.
Yeah.
We are a clear market leader there.
Fairly, I was a recession-proof, but resilient to recession business.
Fairly resilient sector for right. So weddings we are solidly behind that business, and we'll invest in what it takes to get that business to a different level. The other businesses, so we recently, if you've picked it up, we announced a vertical called Frontier with a new leader there, Ankit Gupta, who's joined in. And Frontier, what we realized that we had in a growth phase started a bunch of businesses which are all very strong businesses in their own right, but could do with consolidation of leadership, supervisory levels, and synergies. There are tons of synergies in the businesses. So where we are sitting, Townhouse, other self-operated brands, OYO Life, which is the co-living business, OYO Homes, which is again a very large business for us. So these businesses have come under what's called the Frontier business. The growth aspirations for each business remains, but again the same metrics of path to profitability apply on each individual business, along with sustainability.
So you're basically consolidating, from what you're telling me, the co-living business under the Frontier umbrella.
Co-living, self-operated hotels, and homes.
Okay.
That comes under Frontier.
So living and hospitality comes under Frontier.
Correct.
And this gentleman, from what I know, is an ex-McKinsey partner.
Ankit was a senior partner from.
So he understands consultancy and management and all of that very well.
No, and more importantly, he's backed by a solid team with him, which has been many of them who have been with OYO for a fairly long time, and so that's one part. And co-working, look, we are a very solid co-working player. We have top 5 in the country. We have built the business fairly silently. Ritesh Malik built Innovate into a good platform.
Yeah.
He came and became part of the family. I think it's a small team, but really punches away its weight. You should go and see some of the centers. Very high occupancy levels, good solid cash flows. It's a solid business, right? Equally, I think the mothership, which is the franchisee business, is being attended to in terms of partners, customers, financials, operations. There's a lot to be fixed. Let me admit that. like you can imagine in a startup which has scaled up fast, there's a lot to be fixed. And I have worked in multiple other companies. In every company, at any point in time, I could say there's a lot to be fixed.
Correct.
Right? So OYO is no different. Right? And the entire team, I think, is now focused on making sure these 2 or 3 verticals that we have now, each of them build very sustainably in 2020, become more relevant in the market than they are even today, already significantly relevant, and continue the journey. Now, in the process that some of them may get to a profitability equation faster, some may get slightly later, that's okay. As long as we see clear growth path to profitability.
And so you will obviously therefore save money and have profitability with this kind of consolidation exercise. What I also found interesting in the course of this interview, Rohit, is that you said investments will not stop. So are you in fundraising mode?
No. So I want to separate out the fact that investments can happen without fundraising being going on. Right? We are well funded right now. So we were not in fundraising mode 3 months back. Neither are we in fundraising mode right now. We are well funded. Having said that, I think just because we have funding doesn't mean that we have to spend it, right? So we will invest in every area which makes sense from a growth and profitability standpoint, balancing out all the other metrics. So for example, we will spend on, let's say, getting better at all kinds of governance and compliances, right? Which may not have a direct business correlation, but is equally required to build a franchise which is global in nature. So investments will continue. I don't think investments are going to, I don't think the markets or the world should see that the restructuring exercise is a way of stopping investments. Absolutely not.
But will you shut down, let's say, properties which are not well performing, properties where partners are giving you problems, properties where there are a lot of complaints that have been received? Airbnb, which is of course shown it believes in the OYO story by investing in your last fundraise, is doing that, right? And has come out with a global mission of how every property has to be verified, every property has to be under that quality control check, and it's doing so. Will OYO do something similar?
So
at least in India?
So look, I think let me give you a little bit of insight into how we sort of manage customer expectations at different property levels. So we have had, and this is not new, we already had it, something called a 3C framework, which means that every property of OYO goes through, and I won't get into the complexities of it, but it is a system of rating which says how is the property performing vis-a-vis customer metrics.
Yeah.
And to us, that is a North Star.
But right? Are you therefore going to revalue that and shut down the loss-making propositions?
I think it's not just about loss-making. Loss-making is one part which is a P&L angle to it. But even otherwise,
brand dilution.
Even if there's a property which is profitable for me, technically, but we see constantly customers getting hassled there, we have to take curative actions and steps.
So are you doing that?
We do it all the time.
Okay, so you do it all the time?
Yes.
And what about all these allegations of corporate governance? You told me your priorities for 2020. You touched upon it a little bit. What do you have to say to all those that are watching the OYO story and these alarms are, rung fairly regularly?
So look, I don't know about corporate governance because that's a very broad word and that has significant meaning. What I meant by governance is to say that every company can improve the way it is running the company, and every year, right? So to us, it has always been well governed. By the way, I personally feel that the levels of financial controls, etc., that I've seen when I joined, for a startup with a maturity of 4 years into the system was quite significant. Right? It is already a very well governed company. I want to make sure that that message is loud and clear. Having said that, you always keep benchmarking higher and say, can I be gold standard on something next year, right? And move forward on that. And look, we are not a small company anymore. We are audited by all the major auditors that you can think of. So I won't go in there, but let me assure everybody who's watching this show that it is a well-governed company already.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
It's a question of taking that to an even higher degree and level because that's what the world expects of us.
Yeah, fair point.
Right?
It's a good
and
point.
we will deliver on that.
And with that, I've run out of time, so I'm going to thank you. Here's wishing you and the entire team at OYO all the very best. I hope you get over this tough time quickly, and all the very best for your road to profitability.
Thank you. I'm very confident with the team will grow much better, faster, and sustainably.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.